to call this meeting to order. This is the Planning Board of St. Pete Beach, the meeting for Monday, June 16th, 2025. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Member Perry?
Here.
Member Grocott?
Here.
Chair Hubbard?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, I would like to add an item to discuss concerning our priorities.
Okay.
Priorities. I took the liberty of, I'm going to ask to have this on the screen, but I put this at your seating places so that you wouldn't have to try to take notes.
Okay. I will add that as 5C. Member Grocott, any changes?
Yes, I'd like to add a discussion item on the signing ordinance.
Okay. Okay, I'll put that as 5D. Okay, can I get a motion to approve the modified agenda?
I move to approve the modified agenda.
Second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Chair Hubbard?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. Do we have any audience comments? Does not appear so. Okay, we will move on to approval of the minutes for the May 19th, 2025 Planning Board. Any changes? Okay, can I have a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of the May 19th, 2025 meeting.
I second.
Roll call, please.
Member Perry?
Yes.
Member Grocott?
Yes.
Chair Hubbard?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. Okay, we have no action items today, so we will move on to discussion item 5A, Community Redevelopment Agencies.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, board members. I'm Gil Martinez, Senior Planner with Community Development. And we're going to provide you with a quick presentation, just generally speaking to what a community redevelopment agency is and potentially how a CRA would be of benefit to the city of St. Pete Beach. Sorry. So a community redevelopment agency, commonly known as a CRA, it's established by Florida Statute 163. A community redevelopment agency is a public agency created by a local government for the purpose of revitalizing areas facing economic decline, blight, or infrastructure challenges. It is a mission to improve its physical condition, attract private investment, and to enhance the quality of lives in the designated redevelopment zones. A CRA, Community Redevelopment Agency, is established by identifying that there is a condition of blight exists. So local governments must identify that an area shows signs of blight, as defined in Florida statute. Blight indicators may include deteriorated buildings, aging infrastructure, high vacancy rates, inadequate roadways or utilities, environmental contaminations, unsafe or unhealthy conditions. These are just a few examples. There's many more that can be included. Once it's developed a document, the finding of necessity report must be prepared, and the document must illustrate the conditions that exist. Within the CRA is also the community redevelopment area, which is the actual geographic area that is identified for the purposes of tax increment financing. In the case of what we've been considering here in St. Pete Beach, we are looking at a CRA that is greatly focused on resiliency and improvement of infrastructure. So in working with conjunction with Public Works, we identified areas that align with our capital improvement projects. So we are looking at potentially an area that to the north starts with the residential office retail zoning, and to the south ends at the Bayou Residential District. This would be a consideration as a potential area for consideration. So upon, going through the process, and retaining someone or working with or developing a finding of necessity, the finding of necessity must clearly demonstrate that there's a presence of blight, and it must be justified that the CRA meets Florida Statute 163 requirements. The report is then presented to the local government, city commission, county commission. Adoption of a resolution declaring the need for a CRA. The governing body, in this case the city commission, votes to adopt a resolution confirming that the area meets the criteria for a CRA as per Florida statute and by way of our finding of necessity as well. This action establishes the intent to create a CRA and move forward with planning. A community redevelopment plan is then developed for the purpose of the CRA. The plan includes proposed projects such as infrastructure, housing, public facilities, and funding strategies, typically the use of tax increment financing, usually referred to as TIF. There's a process for community input and community engagement strategies. A timeline is created, goals and performance measures are created, and the plan must align with the city's comprehensive plan. So if this CRA moves forward and a community redevelopment plan is defined, that community redevelopment plan must be in line with their comprehensive plan as well. The local government adopts an ordinance formally establishing a CRA, approving the community redevelopment plan. The ordinance also establishes the CRA governing body. That local governing body could be the city commission itself, or it could be appointed as a separate appointed board. Once adopted, the CRA must notify the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity and the county. If the CRA affects tax county revenues, interlocal agreements are required regarding revenue sharing or terms of TIF use. This is a quick explanation what tax increment financing is. CRAs use TIF as its primary funding tool. When the CRA is established, the property tax values are frozen at a base year. So if you look at that graph in a 25-year span, the area in purple would be the base ad valorem year. As property values rise due to redevelopment, the increment, or i.e. the difference in the tax revenue, is directed towards the CRA. So the triangle in yellow, the incremental AV, that is the amount of funds generated, which in turn would be eligible for use for improvements within the community redevelopment area. TIF revenues is reinvested into projects within the CRA boundary. Implement the CRA and begin redevelopment activities. CRA is now a functioning entity capable of entering into contracts, acquiring and disposing properties, applying for grants, issuing bonds, using TIF funds for capital improvements and public-private partnerships. That concludes the presentation on a CRA and what we can expect when we discuss CRAs. I'm glad to take any questions, defer to Laura as well, who's very well versed in CRA, and I'm sure Ralph, you can weigh in as well. So any questions and input, glad to take them.
I do have some questions. I don't know if anybody else does.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I looked at the material in the packet, and that, what's it called, the information, the name of it, the finding of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this particular one that was in the packet had pictures from like 2005.
Yeah, that's a 2005.
And there was another one done around Corey in 2013. And for some reason, neither one of those went forward. So obviously there's pros and cons to everything you do. But I was just wondering if we know why they didn't go forward when this was done before. And secondly, there are other places that have gone through hurricanes like we have, which has dramatically changed the picture, and I can certainly speak more to that. I'm just wondering if Cape Coral or any of those other locations took this approach and if they were successful with it.
I can tell you that based on our research and going back to 2005 and that finding of necessity, it is our understanding that at the time, county was a bit hesitant to consider CRAs for coastal communities, for barrier island communities. That has changed somewhat. There are provisions in the criteria for CRA now that speaks to resiliency, and that may be one of the reasons that it stalled and didn't go any further.
And what about the 2013 effort?
I'm not familiar with the 2013 effort or what ended up with that. I know that there was a study that took place, but why that didn't go any further, I can't really speak to that.
I remember it, and there were a lot of really bad suggestions. I mean, the people, the consultant company that worked on it clearly didn't understand, our particular environment.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that had anything to do with it. When I looked at the pictures from 2005, I was happy to see that some of the blight that was there, like I remember the gas station that's now a Baskin Robbins and Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, a lot of those things took care of themselves. And part of what I'm wondering is, now that we've had so much destruction from the last 2 hurricanes, like there's a lot of houses in my neighborhood would probably be declared a blight at this point. So many houses are torn down, so many of them are waiting for, I don't know, insurance money, grants, whatever. Part of my concern with this is the implication for taxes, which is why I'd like to know what other areas have seen. And I just wonder if this is a good time for this type of project in light of the fact that we have so many issues going on the island right now. So those are some of my questions.
Definitely something to take into consideration as we explore. This is the first time that we're having this discussion in general, so there's a lot to take into consideration, a lot of research to be done. So
right.
All the input.
And I agree with all that, and one of the things I've asked to have added to the agenda, interestingly, you would use the word resiliency, and this may be one approach to get to resiliency, and there are other approaches, and so I think we're all trying to address the same problem. But I just was wondering, because I know that this hasn't gone forward twice before.
Very well.
I had a question about TIFs. So is it specifically just for property tax?
TIF?
Yeah.
Yes, it's completely ad valorem
So
tax.
when it says freezing the assessed amount, is it really freezing it from the property owner's perspective or just from distribution of funds?
Distribution of funds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So is the primary purpose to allow the CRA to receive guaranteed funds regardless of future opinions that the commission may have, because now it's set in stone, this is what's happening with that money for the CRA?
Correct.
Okay.
The main kind of, again, with these CRAs, they're a tool in the toolbox, in many cases they've become one of the only economic development tools left at the local level, and they were on the chopping block again this year, because that comes up frequently. It seems as though sometimes the more successful a CRA gets, the more it deviates away from its purpose, right? And so that's one of the things that you risk. However, in our case, I can tell you that I think one of the biggest benefits and why revisiting this now and the importance of looking at this again is really just looking at how to leverage and layer the funding. And so because we are in Pinellas County and it's a charter county, in addition to the finding of necessity and per the statute what we would be looking at per those conditions, we would also be looking at Pinellas County has changed their delegation criteria. So any new CRAs coming forward now, as well as any CRAs that are looking to expand or extend their operational time frame, are now subject to the county's criteria, which looks at things like if it's in a coastal high hazard area. There's stuff in there that wasn't in there, and it kind of creates this additional layer. And it kind of also flipped the script on the funding, because at least in my experience with most CRAs, and if you were in a charter county and had the county's participation, usually it's a 95% contribution from the participating county and, you know, the municipality. Pinellas County has changed that. They've basically said that we're going to start at a 50, and then you kind of work your way up. So based on that need and those conditions. So, and we've looked at it just very preliminary, just looking at the area, but that's the primary purpose would be knowing the infrastructure and resiliency needs that we have. It really is just a funding mechanism to leverage and layer. And then I think you said it very clearly, but I just, for the public benefit, you know, when it comes, it doesn't change anything, like it doesn't initiate any additional tax on their tax bill. The valuation would go up just the same. It's just that incremental difference that then would go into, again, it would be per the city's millage, per the county's millage, and then whether it was 95% of that, or say we landed at a 75% from the county and 95 from city, then those funds would go into the redevelopment trust fund for that area. Anything up until that point would still go into the general fund and be, you know, be able to be used and expended anywhere.
Could the city potentially have to increase its millage rate as a result of the TIF? Because if there's a budget shortfall and you've got guaranteed money being taken from the tax rolls for the CRA, now they could potentially have to raise the millage rate to make up on the general side?
No, because it's only based on the increment, and so what you'll sometimes see is, in my experience, you may see a CRA that's created that doesn't realize a TIF for maybe 3-5 years. There's been even other worst-case scenarios. I've also seen situations where, for example, in Clearwater, where the base year was actually reset because for so many years there wasn't a TIF being generated, and so they do a look back and they actually reset it again, just to your point, so that you're never in that position. It's always moving forward and based on that incremental difference.
Okay. Given the fact that a CRA is defined in Florida statute, does it offer us any advantages? Perhaps it would trump other Florida statutes that we find not favorable? Does it offer anything like that?
Not that I know of. For example, development within a CRA still has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, the future land use element, and all those chapters. It would also then have to be considered under the CRA plan as well.
Okay.
But the CRA plan does not trump the comprehensive plan. It has to
So
be
it's-
consistent with it.
So the CRA coming to exist for the purpose of solving blight wouldn't allow us to modify our comp plan in a way that a different piece of Florida statute says we can't do.
The two things are separate.
Okay.
The CRA plan has to be consistent with the comp plan at all times. Doesn't mean you can't amend your comp plan separately.
Okay.
You'd have to do that if you were doing something that's contrary to the comp plan.
Okay.
And should the city decide to move forward with the establishment of the CRA, and, you know, the FON is the first step, and then the delegation of authority, and then when you get to the redevelopment plan step in the process, that's when it would be coming before you all as the LPA to review it and also really help in the development of it. You know, but that's, as the LPA, is really the most important stop when you're creating and establishing a CRA.
Okay. Katie?
So, going back to the point of the CRA nesting with the comprehensive plan. So it's been suggested over the last several months that the comp plan needs to be reviewed. So I guess it's kind of a cart-horse situation. Is it, in your opinion, better to look at that comprehensive plan as the first step, or to go ahead and potentially look at a CRA, and then where we may find conflict individually, section by section, kind of look at the comprehensive plan to try to continue to ensure they nest?
So right now, because of Senate Bill 180, you're probably not going to be able to do anything more restrictive or burdensome with your comp plan. You can be more liberal, allow more development, but you can't allow less development. You can't have more procedural stops, you can have less procedural stops. So you can only go one way with the comp plan at this point until they lift the Senate Bill 180 in a couple of years. The CRA I would think of in my mind as a way to create financing, funding, to do things like streetscape improvements, put street lights in, put brick street pavers in, do things with the sewer line within the CRA district, do stormwater projects within the CRA, do those kinds of projects, giving you money to do infrastructure projects most typically.
So, yeah, so we're focusing on infrastructure, got it. As far as grants were mentioned, does the CRA give us access to grants that the city may otherwise not have access to? Is there anything specific to being exclusive to a CRA potentially, or available exclusively to a CRA?
I can tell you that it helps because it gives you that blueprint for a lot of the grant opportunities, if that makes sense. Your kind of story is already there, so you're and you already have your projects identified. And since a lot of times, as you know, with grant applications, either they want to see that match already in the budget, and a lot of times we can't do that, so it just gives that other mechanism to be able to say it's in our plan.
So it strengthens
Documented.
our case,
Yes.
in your opinion? Okay, thanks.
You might get points, for example, in certain grant applications. They award points for different things. If you're in a CRA, that might help get you points.
And just
And matching.
and just one more thing to add. We've been in communication. We've been working with the University of Florida Fiber, their organization, and they basically, the mayor had attended a summit where he talked about even the possibility of creating a CRA, because there's other communities across the state, and as kind of the subsequent step to that is that we're continuing those discussions with Fiber, because knowing that the barrier islands, not just St. Pete Beach, but really any of the coastal communities in Pinellas County, historically haven't been the ones that are what we think of when we think of CRA. And so as we've talked about the importance of how this is going to be so resilience and infrastructure centric, well, Fiber has such good data available, and they already are looking at some of these things and have. So they're going to be in contact with, as we develop the finding of necessity, as well as if we move to the next steps, our goal is to be able to, at the end of this, have, they're just as much of a partner throughout this process. And so being able to visualize, again, because it's kind of a different type of blight that we're talking about that isn't as easy to take a photograph of, unless you are in the, aftermath of the storm. And then, how accurate is that if you're depicting, the worst case scenarios, and here we are, 9 months later. So they're going to be hopefully assisting us throughout that process, and I think going to be a great resource. And also one of the things that we talked about with them is, how you set your plan up for those grant funding opportunities.
Great. And I think
Fiber, I just want to tell an acronym people may not be familiar with. It's University of Florida's Institute for Built Environment Resilience. FIBER. And they were formed in 2018, and they're working with other coastal communities in Florida as well.
Does that differ from I read something in the agenda packet about, I think it was UF's College of Law was working on certain things to benefit small municipalities like ours. Is that different?
So there's a Fiber, which is part of the College of Design and Planning.
Oh.
And then they work with the law school. There's joint programs for students to take planning and law. You receive a joint degree. There's also a conservation clinic at the University of Florida Law School. And those two programs within two different departments of the same university work together with communities like St. Pete Beach to come up with resiliency programs through this Fiber.
Okay.
Looking at the slide that you have up here addressing infrastructure, when I read the packet, I really didn't get the clear message that we were talking about infrastructure and resiliency. So part of my concern was that we were going to be diverted to blight when we really had, higher, in my mind, higher priority. So I guess that needs to be flushed out a little bit to really understand, why we would want to do this.
Mm-hmm. Florida has a pretty liberal definition of blight. It takes in some pretty affluent communities that we would not normally think of as urban blight. And the criteria are very liberal, so it's pretty easy to qualify to be a CRA, but then the money can be used for these resiliency projects. I think that our local representative, Linda Cheney, was actually talking about trying to put more money and CRAs into resiliency projects.
Yeah, that would be,
Less
that
money
would
in
be,
business marketing type aspects.
because I think a lot of the blight, the hurricane probably helped move along, people having to deal with that.
And with the county's criteria, what they've changed, they've actually now outlined what they would, like what county TIF can be expended on versus city TIF. And again, they're all in one trust fund, but as you can imagine, you pay for some infrastructure over here, now that frees up funding in the general fund, and that can be used. So it is kind of like a leveraging and layering. But they've outlined what it can and can't, and they've gotten much more specific. Because again, it just, as the success of some of the CRAs, allowed them the opportunity to maybe have spending, say, for festivals or for public art, not to say that that's not community renewal, but again, going back to what
That's
the
not
purpose
where
of. My really favorite example to use is, I worked with the St. Augustine CRA in their historic area. And when that CRA was founded, it was founded on transportation and parking blight. It was very specific because if you know St. Augustine, you know that the inadequate infrastructure and parking that they had there. Again, but when you think of St. Augustine, at least I don't think of slum and blighted. But that was what their findings were based on. And then with the revenue that was generated, they were able to build the parking. They bonded for the parking garage, and then now they have the parking garage in their historic area. So I think what we've seen, at least over the last 10 to 20 years, is kind of a shift in revisiting that, remember what the intention of, and being very specific and intentional of what your CRA's purpose is. And again, just knowing kind of that we're going to be potentially one of the first in Pinellas County as far as barrier island communities go. I think it's going to be very important, to your point, that we continue to focus on infrastructure resiliency.
Would the northern boundary of the CRA be inclusive of Pump Station 1?
It could be.
Okay.
I believe so.
We've worked very closely with Public Works, and we identified where they have capital improvement projects planned out for, and aligned it with the CRA boundaries to the best of our ability.
Okay.
So, yeah.
You get to draw your own lines when you're creating the CRA.
Okay.
No, I would like to hear more about, again, the resiliency and what they're actually planning. And I do think it can be one tool in the toolbox. We certainly need other tools. One of the things I have concerns about, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I know the City Commission is having a couple of retreats on prioritization tomorrow and Wednesday, 4:30 to 7:30. I can never make it Tuesday, but I will go Wednesday. Because I think that there's a lot of demands coming from every direction, and I think having clear priorities is really crucial to achieving success. And I didn't know much about this, but I do know there are some other areas where I feel we are really behind the times, and it's hurting our residents. So, I want to make sure that we include those items.
So the next step is we are scheduled to go to the commission meeting on the 8th with the finding of necessity request. We have received a scope of services to conduct the finding of necessity, and that will be going before the commission for their consideration.
On the establishing the CRA, so when you set the boundaries for it, those tax bases are set within that boundary. Can the money generated over time also only be used within that section then, right? It's not, you can't apply it to any part of St. Pete Beach. And then revenue generated from outside the tax revenue generated from out the CRA can't be augmenting that CRA, right? They're complete, distinct, set by the boundaries.
Just the increment, right? So the base anything below the base, that continues to be general revenue, but this increment, once you establish the baseline and hopefully property values go up, that increment gets put back into the CRA and to the county, and the county and the city have to figure out what share goes to each one.
But only properties within the established boundaries of the CRA.
And only that increment above the establishment.
And I think you raise a really important point, because what I'm seeing is that property values are really going down right now, overall. So I don't know, and I did read something somewhere when I was looking into CRAs about, have been instances where the thing hasn't gone up and they really haven't, generated.
It's a bit of an art, kind of like the stock market. You want to buy low and then watch it grow. So you want to, as it's going down, you want to buy thinking it's going to start going up soon.
So
And then that's why also sometimes they reset if they set the baseline at the wrong point in time, or it becomes more advantageous to establish a new baseline, then they can reset the baseline.
So
So if
potentially,
it keeps going lower, you keep resetting it.
potentially if we had our CRA encompassed an area with a lot of vacant lots and the base was set there, and then those vacant lots were developed, that increased revenue would go to the CRA. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, Dragon, thank you.
So to add to what Laura stated, we are looking at a date of July 8th to bring the item forth to the City Commission, and we have received confirmation from the University of Florida Fiber that they will also be here to speak to the resiliency matter,
Yeah, exactly what
which
you're
is very
trying to
important
do.
to
Yeah.
this entire mission. Its primary purpose is resiliency and infrastructure deficiencies.
Okay. I don't think we have anything else.
Other than I'd still be curious if you find out if, some of the other areas that were hit a couple years before us.
Absolutely, it's a very good point. I'm sure there are areas that already had CRAs established, but I'm not sure if I know of any that have tried to bring forth CRAs since the storms, but I'll definitely look into it and come back to you with a report for next month.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to discussion 5B, the Florida Model Lighting Ordinance for Sea Turtle Protection.
Get to the presentation. Yeah. Okay, I see it. Excellent. Okay, Gil Martinez, Senior Planner with Community Development, here before you with the marine turtle lighting standards in St. Pete Beach. There's been a great deal of discussion about this. With me is Pete Dewar from Code Enforcement, who's probably watching us somewhere. In the event you have any questions for him in regards to the enforcement. But it's a quick presentation, and I'll try my best to answer any questions. My knowledge of this is rather limited. I'm doing this for Brandon, who's not here today, but our city attorney, I'm sure, can weigh in if you have any questions. Okay, some of the background. Due to significant feedback on the beach ordinance, staff has chosen to present the item as 3 separate ordinances. Ordinance number 1 is regarding behavioral and conduct issues. That is permitting requirements for public beach solicitors, bicycling on the beach, permits, and prohibitions of wild bird harassment or wildlife harassment in general. Ordinance number 2 is specific to the marine turtle lighting, which addresses standards of existing and new beach-facing lighting. And ordinance number 3, beach alcohol service in cabanas, is addressing the location and stacking requirements for cabanas, alcohol service regulations, etc. So ordinance number 1 and ordinance number 3 are going to be a part of the Code of Ordinance amendments. So ordinance number 1 would be addressing behavioral and conduct issues on the beach. And ordinance number 3 will be addressing alcohol and service cabanas. Ordinance number 2 would be addressed through our Land Development Code, Division 44, and that is specific to the marine turtle lighting. Current regulations from 2007, the city has existing regulations for marine turtles lighting in Division 44 of the Land Development Code. Regulations pertain to existing lighting for new development. Division 44 was adopted in 2007 and contains outdated standards, such as allowing for non-turtle friendly bulbs. It lacks technical standards for visible light transmittance. Lack of defined dunes on some properties makes standards based around natural screening irrelevant or difficult to enforce. And finally, lacks vetting process for bulbs and equipment. It's, in general, just too general. Fish and Wildlife Model Lighting Ordinance for 2020. It's a voluntary model ordinance to bring communities statewide into compliance with science-based regulations. Contained in the regulations for the FWC Certified Wildlife Lighting Program, e.g. bulbs and bollards, pre-vetted equipment and standards reduce reliance on local evaluations. So one of the benefits of this is that the FWC has already vetted the type of lightings and equipment that are acceptable. It regulates new improvements as well as complete statewide redevelopment. So it would apply to standards to pools, additions, and even whole properties in the redevelopment process. Specific standards for visible light transmittance, and it provides more objective criteria for existing lighting, special events, pre-season inspection scheduling. Along with that ordinance, the FWC model ordinance does not majorly change existing standards for new vertical development. It adds more objective technical standards for evaluating compliance, including new accessory development, such as parking lots, pools, beach walkovers. It adds specific vetted standards for bulbs, windows, films, and other standards where local official knowledge may not be sufficient. Some of the challenges may be that there is no identified major challenges from the FWC model ordinance for new vertical development. When parking lots or pools are built and no dunes exist, vegetation or low mount lights or bollards may not need to be used due to lack of natural screen. Non-dune ground level barrier construction is the last resort. With existing development, light meters, spectrometers require being within feet of the light source. Ownership often extends far seaward of the dunes in St. Pete Beach. Questions remained around whether turtle-safe lighting tests are sufficient when citing violations. The next steps in this process is to solicit the planning board's feedback, which is now. Discuss the content, challenges, solutions with the Beach Stewardship Committee and technical experts when viable. Return a draft ordinance to the planning board or vote for a vote. Move ordinance to the City Commission for first and final readings. So this is where we are. Obviously, we're looking to model the Fish and Wildlife Ordinance to the best of our ability. There are pros associated with it. They've done a lot of the legwork as far as identifying what is the correct type of lighting, what is the correct type of equipment. So it takes a lot of that out of our preview, and it's more objective in general.
I think my first question would just be, after last meeting, I believe City Attorney, you were going to investigate whether there was an inherent conflict between adopting this and SB 180 prohibiting it.
Yep, so we've looked into that, and I've talked with Brandon and Becky Vose, and what we think is that we could adopt, similar to the FWC being a voluntary model lighting ordinance. When they say voluntary, they made it's voluntary for cities and counties to adopt it, and most have. But because of Senate Bill 180, it's probably best to adopt it as a voluntary technical guidance to assist property owners with ongoing compliance. adopting it by resolution or adopting it as a footnote, making it a voluntary technical guidance, and it's there so that they can, as property owners, figure out what kind of lights to buy, what kind of lights, if they do purchase them, would satisfy our existing code. Our existing code compliance relies on, I think the beach committee saw the cards for helping property owners determine whether their lights can be seen by turtles. So if we have a voluntary technical guidance, say someone fails that card test, property owner then says, okay, well, what do I have to do now? What lights should I buy that won't fail that card test? So this model lighting ordinance has these technical standards in there that they can take to the internet or a lighting shop, and they can say, hey, I need this particular light, and I need to replace my bulb with this. I need a new housing. This is the type of housing I need. So it would be looked at as technical guidance to assist a property owner rather than a more burdensome or more restrictive land development code requirement.
If we were to move to that, are we giving up the ability to enforce what we might want to enforce in the current code?
No, you can still enforce your current code. It's just a way to point the property owner, in order to come into compliance, here's some voluntary technical assistance to bring your property into compliance. And that would also help them with achieve ongoing compliance, because as you go further down the road into the years where SB 180 no longer applies, but also as new technology advances, they keep updating the model Sea Turtle lighting ordinance. They're working on one now at FWC to add some additional technology that's available, so we can adopt it as the model ordinance by the FWC rule number as may be amended from time to time. That way, as they amend the model lighting criteria, that can become new guidance. And then once SB 180 goes away, you can consider making the voluntary technical guidance mandatory, but we can't right now within the land development code. For some of the behavioral code sections, we possibly could.
Okay. Does our code dictate the manner in which compliance is determined? So we've got our existing sea turtle lighting regulations. Does it also state how code enforcement is to determine whether someone's in compliance or not?
Code enforcement is here, and they can explain how they do it now.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Board. I'm Pete Dewar, Code Enforcement Manager for the City of St. Pete Beach. The existing code that we use, it allows us to regulate lighting, and we have in fact cited a property for infraction, lighting infraction, taken to special magistrate. As a matter of fact, I think we had a recent case where this person was a repeat violator, so we brought him back to the special magistrate hearing, and I think they were fined $500 per day. What Mr. Brooks just explained, Attorney Brooks just explained, is we have a card that we use with a lens that we're able to utilize on the beach, and when we use that card, it helps us to determine if a property has a lighting infraction, and we are able to cite using our existing code. The existing code is written in such a way that there might not necessarily, as Mr. Brooks was alluding to, you might not have to necessarily do wholesale changes to. It's adequate enough for enforcement purposes. If there is additional sections of the code that we might be able to amend or modify, we can use that model code to make those amendments. The bug type lights, for example, is, from what we have understood, is, and we've all been certified by the Sea Turtle Conservancy. So the bug type lights are, I think, ancient. They're no longer useful. And so it's in our existing code, those lights, if we can, for example, remove that language, it would bring us up to a standard or a code that we can effectively continue to use.
Okay. Is the cards, my understanding from reading the FWC model ordinance is they're basically to not show wavelengths that are visible to turtles, so if you see light coming through, you know it would be visible?
Right.
Okay.
Yes. It's like, think of it as an X-ray film. I don't know if you've ever looked through an X-ray film and you can see certain types of lights. So for example, if we were to use the lens on these lights, they would reflect kind of bluish, purplish, and it would be an infraction. That exit light, if we were looked through the same lens, you would not see that light at all. So we could say these lights are in violation while that light is not.
Okay. Any other questions?
So in adopting, or if it's a decision to adopt this, does the, either the variance board or the commission, when deciding on conditional use permits, do they still have the ability to negotiate higher standard compliance voluntarily as part of a CUP? So developer wants to come in and put something on the beach side, and they need a CUP to do so. Can the commission compel that developer to say, you will comply with these standards? And if so...
We can add conditions to a conditional use
Yeah.
permit addressing lighting.
And then it is enforceable to the higher standard, even though it's not part of the land development code because it was part of the CUP?
Well, Senate Bill 180 also covers not just comp plans and land development code changes, it also covers development orders and development permits. So it'd have to be crafted very carefully, but we certainly could reference the Sea Turtle lighting ordinance and the conditions, and the FWC manual and the conditions. And the criteria in there can be helpful, guiding a developer where they're going to put their fixtures, how they're going to shield them, what foot candles to use, what cumulatively visible means, and certified wildlife lighting sources, 10.76 lux, for example. They can go get all this technical stuff where a lighting engineer can read that and know how to design a project to be in compliance with those voluntary guidelines. And then if they're in compliance with those, they won't fail the lens that's being held up to them by code enforcement. Code enforcement won't tell you what kind of lights to put in. They just tell you, hey, you're in violation. So now the landowner needs to figure out, what do I do to stop my violation through the lens? And that's where the Model Sea Turtle ordinance lighting criteria can be helpful.
Yeah, it seemed pretty straightforward. I suspect the real problem is ensuring your vendor who promises you these bulbs will give off this particular wavelength and nothing above it, whether that's true or not.
Kind of like shopping on Facebook. It's
Yeah.
not always what you
Yeah.
get in the package when you order it, and then it arrives at your house.
What Member Grocott said makes me curious. If a developer agrees to a more restrictive CUP to gain approval, can they then choose to appeal like a line item appeal of something in the CUP outside of the commission to say, hey, I agreed to this, but I shouldn't have had to because it doesn't meet these laws, or something along those lines? Or are you, by agreeing, you're saying, I'm taking this as it is and there's nothing further to be done?
If they agree, typically not, but sometimes they won't agree, and then they'll challenge them. They'll say, we'll take the approval with the caveat that we are still going to challenge these criteria.
Okay.
We've had a couple of those, not with Sea Turtle lighting, but with other criteria.
Okay.
I'm happy to see someone from the Beach Stewardship Committee here, because I know they have done a tremendous amount of work on this, and I just want to make sure from a process thing that we're not usurping them, or, I mean, I don't know how, I know in your slide it shows that there is a place where it all comes together, but I just
It
wanted
goes through both advisory boards. So both your boards will comment to the City Commission.
Yeah, I think the only real concern I had was giving up something we currently enforce by adopting this, but as long as that is not occurring, then...
Yeah, unfortunately, we won't be able to because of Senate Bill 180. We're stuck with what we have, but we can give some more guidance, voluntary guidance,
Okay.
which would be helpful for everyone for ongoing compliance, at least until Senate Bill 180 is no longer impacting us.
Okay.
I'm very happy to hear you say that optimistically, because I have a feeling it's going to be here forever.
Well, there is two sections. There's one that just addressed hurricanes Milton and Helene, and another hurricane forget the name now, but there's another section of 180 that says for all future hurricanes, there'll be a moratorium and a prevention on more burdensome and restrictive regulations or criteria or conditions for 1 year after that hurricane.
100 miles of the track, right?
100 miles of the track for that, every future hurricane storm, so.
Yeah, I would love for it to expire because that means we made it without a hurricane coming within 100 miles.
Yes. During those periods of time, you're free to adopt more burdensome and more restrictive.
Are there any audience?
It's difficult because some of the things you want to do for resiliency are by their very nature more burdensome,
Of course.
Mhm.
restrictive. So you're almost prevented from doing resiliency when after a storm, only before storms.
Okay. Member Perry reminded me I forgot to solicit audience comments for 5B if we had any. I don't believe we do. Okay. Are we okay to move on?
Do we
Okay.
have any on this?
The next one is your discussion item,
Okay.
5C, priority of planning board.
Well, Petey, I'm glad to see you here because a lot of what I have to say has to do with how our current code is failing us. So I asked to have priorities put on, and I do know the commission has those two retreats tomorrow and Wednesday. So I would hope that the prior topic that we had and possibly this, I did put some handouts on. So can I ask you to put the thing on the, well, they're up there. Okay. So the first one, I've been watching with great interest what's happening at Treasure Island because I keep hearing how some of the things that we're doing are hurting our residents. And I feel like this is a fairly urgent situation. So this was published in the Catalyst. I don't even really know what that is, but Treasure Island, they tried doing an Elevate TI. They had some restrictions in it that the people, the residents, were not happy with. So they've made modifications, but basically what they have done is effective May 1st, people can voluntarily elevate their land using fill material, which is a significant shift from the no-fill policy, which I've brought this up before when we did the seawall thing, because I said, you know, we would love to raise our seawall, but if we can't fill behind it, we're not going to, because we don't want to create a mosquito breeding ground or something to save the salt water to kill our grass even worse than it already gets killed. So I feel like we need to be able to address sunny day flooding. I know that this talks about what Treasure Island did. The next thing that I have to put up is their path to resiliency. So I'm very happy to hear us talking about resiliency because I do think, yes, it looks like this one. Thank you so much. So they have a plan for how to get their island elevated. And if we don't start thinking about elevating, then we're going to be underwater. So we need to think about it. And then they also have a roadmap, environmentally sustainable roadmap, which is the third thing. So I passed these out because I thought it would be easier. I can give you a couple of examples of why I feel this is so urgent right now. My husband has a colleague who has torn his house down in Paso Grill and wants to rebuild. And he's been told that his garage can only be 16 inches above the crown of the road. And I said feet on here, which is a mistake. So what that means is that every time there's a king tide, he will have water in his garage. And I think it's crazy for us to have building requirements that put people in that situation. And I know for my own house, the street in front of my house is 3 feet. At the end of our island, it's less than 2 feet, which is why it floods all the time above the datum. And we were able to build our garage 6 feet 2 inches above the street, which they aren't letting people do anymore. And I don't know why that's changed, or if it's because of Paso Grill being different. I don't know why. But, you know, instead of having, you know, about a foot of water from Helene, we would have had like over 20 inches. So people are getting hurt. So here's somebody building their house, and they can't put the floor of their garage above a high tide level. I just don't understand why our codes are not helping people better survive, have resiliency. So I don't know why we're being more restrictive. I think Treasure Island, they're saying you can do fill, and I think they can go 2 feet above grade. I mean, they do have rules around it. It's not just, fill in whatever you want. But I'm hoping to bring this up at the priority meeting for the commissioners, because we have people that are building right now, and our outdated codes are holding them back from being able to be more resilient. And Treasure Island ended up making a lot of this voluntary, and I think that's why it got through, because originally they were going to mandate things and people said, no, I can't afford it. We need to be trying to help our homeowners rebuild more resiliently as soon as possible. So that's why I asked about this being brought forward as a priority and bringing it to the commission.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like changes that would not be impacted by SB 180. We're not being more restrictive.
More flexible.
That's why I had asked Brandon at the last meeting if there was direction from the commission on what we should be working on, and I am hopeful something will come out of the retreat, but if not, we can always try to push for, I mean, I'm sure we all have bits and pieces of the comp plan or land development code that we have a personal interest in bettering, and I'm not opposed to, we can coordinate it through Brandon, but if the planning board wants to have workshops and just collaborate on our own ideas on things we can accomplish, I'm not opposed to trying to make that happen so we can spend more time together, since it's the only time we're allowed to discuss these things, and try to make meaningful changes.
Yep, it looks like Senate Bill 180 would not affect a voluntary increase in the elevation fill limits. So that's something you could look at.
So in general, as we've kind of looked to tackle a couple of these things, we tackled the artificial turf, we've kind of tackled seawalls and things like that. So, I mean, while we're in this period of SB 180, does it behoove the planning board to sit with the staff experts, the city experts, come up with solutions and label them all as voluntary, and while we're in this period, and then it also kind of preps us for, if we ever get out of this situation, we already have what we would want to be mandatory, crafted, worked through city staff, worked through commission, worked through the community, and then we'd be postured to kind of execute getting those things in quickly if we do ever get windows, and prioritize what they would be, so that if we do get breaks in this SB 180, we would kind of have our roadmap, so to speak, ready to go.
But if we could give some relief right now, like this person is being told to build his garage at a level that will be flood every king tide. I mean, how do we force people into a bad situation? And what I was told, and I haven't spoken to him directly, so was that he was told by the city to put a lift in his garage so that he could get his car up when the garage got flooded. And if that's true, that's a very sad approach.
Very expensive approach, that's for sure. Without, again, knowing the specific origin of, was this a historical issue? Was this is it something that's a variance approval to get waiver on? I mean, my understanding is the variance process is available to every resident.
Well, we can take a look at the specific code section that says you can't elevate above a certain amount, and then see if that can be changed or removed or made voluntary instead of mandatory.
Right. And on the
To bring that
fill,
back to you.
that is, right now we're being prohibited from, the code is stopping us from doing something that would be beneficial. So if we could look at those kinds of issues where we're actually causing harm to people.
Right, I'm just suggesting that we would need the appropriate city staff,
Absolutely.
because I presume that everything has a reason.
Yeah.
People didn't just, throw darts at a board and go 16 inches, no fill. Like, there's so I think we need to kind of understand the genesis of the
Right.
development of the code
Right.
to start with.
Right. And I think we have some of that. I mean, a lot of it's historical. A lot of that's been along for a long time. And there was a lot of fill going on in the early days, and I think they tried to put a halt to it. I think now we're in a totally different situation. But I completely agree with you. We need to have experts looking at things so that we can hopefully come up with good solutions.
Or even just to bounce ideas off of. I mean, I know some of that stems from not wanting one property owner to elevate to the point where all of their runoff goes into their neighbor's yard, and that's the kind of thing they would be able to tell us, that's why this exists and why we shouldn't do it
Right,
this
but
way.
see, that's a perfect argument because, like I told you, mine is higher. What we had to put in swales, we had to put in, as part of the construction of our house, where we filled in on the garage, and this was all approved by the city, you know, when we built in 2011. So I don't know what's changed, but it, you know, yes, the problem you're trying to solve is your water can't go to your neighbor. So what do? Put in stem wall? Do you put in drainage? I don't know. But instead of just saying, no, you can't do it, let's identify what is the problem we're trying to solve, and there may be other solutions other than just no.
Sure, and I think the other piece of that is that if we're trying to encourage resiliency, part of that is, you know, you have 3 neighbors in a row that elevate their seawall voluntarily. I mean, I watched it happen across the street. It was absolutely a kind of a pyramid. Like the first house said, oh, I'm going up 18 inches. And the second house said, well, wait a minute, if you're going up 18 inches, then I'm going to go up 18 inches. And then the third house did it. And it went across 5 houses. And believe me, when house number 5 started, he was an absolute, no, I'm not doing this. Like, I'm not spending that money. I'm not doing it. And then he thought about the resiliency of his own property as all of the seawalls around him got elevated. So there is also that, you know, if allowing people to do it then kind of encourages neighbors to do it, you know, and I'm not saying that we should be putting people in a financial spot that they cannot, you know, that we're going to damage their property and they financially cannot be in a place where they would be able to raise a seawall or fill their property or something like that. So, you know, there's all sorts of considerations, but there is some goodness in, you know, watching the you know, domino effect of people improve resiliency on their own personal property.
Absolutely.
Well, should we see what the outcome of the retreats are? If we get observed direction coming our way, and if not, we can coordinate through Brandon and see if we can try to do some of our own work to get things going. I'm not opposed to that at all.
Sounds
so,
great.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to discussion item 5D, sign ordinance.
So my question is for city staff. I watched the commission meeting when they received the recommended ordinance and noted that there was significant opposition to the continuation of pole signs and wanted to see that completely stricken from the ordinance for monument signs. And as I kind of drive down Gulf Boulevard and see in some spots where businesses are very close together, you know, my concern is a staggering of monument signs and what that does to sight line down a road. And I'm just curious, has there been any kind of safety perspective done on that from either our fire or police, whomever does road safety, whoever does those analysis for us? And if there hasn't, I would just, you know, ask that, you know, perhaps that be considered before it goes back to commission for final reading, because that is a concern, I think, when you have people that are not familiar with our roads looking for things, maybe not looking for people coming out. I mean, I'm concerned about pedestrians walking out behind monument signs or cars coming out of cutouts behind monument signs and people not necessarily paying attention and looking for whatever they're looking for if we have series of monument signs in a condensed area.
We can ask Brandon about that and our traffic engineers.
Thanks.
We have a consulting group too that was working with us on the signs.
Great, thank you.
Okay. If nothing else, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting.